starting us off with that. So here's what we're going to work on today. First off, we are going to talk about just generative AI and CPG so you can see what some of your peers are doing in this space. Then we'll get into some specific use cases by business function. And then really what I'm really looking forward to here is the actual prompt engineering where we can get hands-on. We'll talk about we'll do a demo of some things that are possible, and then also talk about, how to build good prompts, give you the opportunity to work on your prompts and talk about what you learned. And then if we have times, we'll talk about mitigating risks because as we have talked about before, there are limitations to generative AI, and one of them is hallucinations, right? The fact that you are going to get outputs that are not correct, and you may not know they're not correct because the model says it in a way that's very convincing. And so something to keep in mind as you go through this, sometimes you will get outputs that are not correct. Sometimes your numbers won't add up, and that can be a challenge when you're relying on these. So if you have questions along the way, please feel free to add them to the chat, and we can also address them before we go into breakouts as well. So let's talk about some generative AI use cases in CPG. Kicking this off, we have a quote here. The new generation of AI has the potential to transform companies and industries. The timeliness and effectiveness of its implementation will be determinative of who the winners and losers will be. This is the CEO of Blackstone, an investment firm, and I think it really sums up the kind of competitiveness between companies when it comes to generative AI and just the motivation behind investing in employees and making sure that they understand how to use generative AI so that way they can bring these ideas to life and really put Coca-Cola into a competitive, an even more competitive advantage by using these tools. So with that, let's talk about how companies are using generative AI in CPG. And you can see here just a couple of different use cases. We have Walmart that bought a chatbot that can bargain with suppliers based on budgets and needs to close each deal. We tend to think of chatbots traditionally as question and answer bots, and here we have one that can actually bargain. So you can imagine the time spent saved on that task. General Mills has a Mills chat, which is an internal tool, which I'm sure was similar to Coke GPT that helps employees with writing and summarizing, so saving time on some of our internal processes. We also have L'Oreal using image recognition. Now, we're not working a lot with image recognition in this course, but image recognition is one of the features of generative AI. So that ability to upload an image, ask questions about it, have it mimic the image, create a new image based on that image, have it extract data from an image. It's a really powerful feature. And so L'Oreal has used it to train models on its brand guidelines and launch campaigns faster. And then we have Unilever's generative AI technology, writing product descriptions for retailers, websites, and digital commerce sites. And what's great about this is you start to see patterns in how these tools are being used, right? One of the most common ways to use these tools is generation, right? I'm asking the model to create something for me. This might be something that's customer facing, it might be internal facing, or maybe I'm just asking the model to brainstorm something with me. I'm not going to use the output, but I'm going to use it to get started. Those are some really common use cases. Another one we're going to look at today is data analysis as well. So breaking that down furthermore, PepsiCo used Gen AI to collect feedback from its customers and incorporate changes in its product displays and messages, and even improvised on the shape and flavor of Cheetos to help PepsiCo achieve a 15% increase in market penetration. I think this is, again, showcasing those use cases of being able to analyze data quickly without having to rely on a data analyst, and then also being able to brainstorm and create innovative ideas around, what already exists. And in this case, improving on the shape and flavor. CPG, Procter & Gamble, they use a ChatGPT that has 35 different use cases for internal processes, right? Right now, we are looking at internal processes, right? The ability to use generative AI to solve a business problem. And that is exactly what Procter & Gamble has done here. Generative AI in business operations, Carrefour has launched Hoopla, a chatbot based on ChatGPT that helps customers with the daily shopping. I think what's really interesting about this is that you could go to ChatGPT or Coke GPT or really any generative AI tool right now and say, create a meal plan for me for the week based on my dietary restrictions, and then go one step further and say, give me a shopping list based on that meal plan, right? Nice personal use. Carrefour went further and said, let's give this option to our users and make it easier when they're on our website to do this. So different use cases, but all of them spanning different ways to use generative AI. So I'm curious from your end, what are you either excited about exploring with generative AI, or what have you already experienced and experimented with in the context of your own role? And I will encourage you to just come off of mute actually and share your thoughts. Or you could do it in the chat as well. I do leave a bit of awkward silence in order to encourage you. Or after a little bit of awkward silence, I will also call on people. So
Nicole, hi. I might just
okay,
start off. So,
thank you.
thank you for the session today. So, my key objective is to see if I can simplify. I do work with a lot of data on emissions and water, and I was looking to maybe, help use AI to consolidate and simplify the process of data collection and also the analytics of it.
Okay, great. And have you already experimented with that, or are you just getting started?
No, I haven't. I'm just getting
Okay,
started. Yeah.
you are in the right place. That's great.
Thank
Thank you for
you.
sharing that. All right. If you have other ideas, feel free to put them in the chat so others can also see. We'll talk a little bit about AI use cases by business functions now. And some of these might feel familiar if you've been in this space before. Maybe you've already experimented. Or if not, maybe these will be a use case that you might want to explore in the context of your business challenges. So in supply chain, we have AI. And by the way, we're speaking AI broadly. This could be generative AI. It could be traditional AI systems. But we have examples in demand forecasting, so you can have models that predict customer demand and optimize inventory levels. Those would be more of a traditional AI model to do that. We have logistics optimization, where we're really looking at streamlining route planning, reducing transportation costs, and then quality control, enhancing defect detection and minimizing product recalls. That quality control piece is really interesting in the manufacturing space and supply chain because I talked about that image recognition earlier, and that ability to really use AI to identify minor defects, right, that are often hard to catch, right, by the naked eye. And so we have AI has gotten so advanced in some of the image recognition that we are able to do really quality defect detection in cases of manufacturing and so on. In strategy, we have things like market analysis. So being able to look at market trends, giving it data and having it analyze what could happen, right? Competitive intelligence. Again, we see this analysis. So we're looking at competitor strategies and summarizing product reviews. I could see, summarizing competitor product reviews, putting that into the model, getting a summary, and then say, based on that, here's our strategy. What are some other strategies we could consider, right? So you're really building on these abilities to taking the information and then brainstorm based on that data. Strategic planning, this is one I really like. So if you are in project management or you manage big projects, enhancing resource allocation. So you can give the context of a project to the model. And when I say the model, this could be Coke GPT. And you can say, here's the project. I have 3 developers and 1 marketer on this project. How should I allocate our resources? And what's the estimated amount of time it would take for this task? And it's a pretty cool tool to see the results. And you may not agree with the results. You might need to tweak them, but at least it gets you started. AI use cases in marketing. I will say that generative AI is, I was just looking at a survey where marketing is one of the top functions that use generative AI right now. The only one that outranks marketing is software developers. And that's because marketing does a lot of content creation, right? And that's what generative AI is really good at, creating different types of content, personalizing it, creating dynamic ad copy. We saw the example earlier of using generative AI for product descriptions. And then we have monitoring brand sentiment. So this idea that you can take feedback from your customers about your product, about your services, and analyze them for sentiment, right? And you can do it in under 5 minutes. I will show you how later. And then we have campaign analysis. Again, we see that common use case of analysis. So looking at how did your campaign perform, and then maybe you do an analysis and then you ask for suggestions on how to optimize that performance. So you can start to see how these use cases work together. You don't have to just do one. You could combine them together and really get some powerful results. Use cases in tech, I talked about this a little bit ago, but software engineers and developers are using generative AI to improve their code, to help with debugging code. I talked about project timelines, like estimating how long is this going to take to complete this project. And then on the UX side, being able to personalize user interfaces based on who's using it. So let's say you have a variety of users from different backgrounds. You could give information to a model that delivers personalized experiences while they're on the website. So if you think about chatbots, some users might experience a different version of your chatbot than others. Generative AI models make this possible. So let's talk about writing prompts for these AI use cases. Does anyone have a use case that they'd like to see demonstrated? And I can demonstrate it with a prompt here.
We have a question on the chat.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Roger is asking what forecasting trend analysis platforms that use AI that you can recommend.
At this point, I can't recommend because we're really focused on CoachGPT. I would say that in your organization, you likely have a data science team that works on forecasting, because forecasting right now is best for, if you're doing a quantitative forecast, you're going to want to go with a traditional AI solution, which is a little bit more intensive, resource intensive to build, but it's a lot more reliable. So one of the hiccups with CoachGPT and generative AI in general is that it's not great at math. And because of the hallucination problem, sometimes we can't trust the outputs. Now you have access to a tool that we'll talk about in just a bit here in CoachGPT called KO Assist, and it's supposed to do quite well with quantitative results. So you might want to experiment with forecasting inside that tool, and I'll show you a little bit later where that tool is at and how to use it. But overall, I would suggest if you're really, if you are going to use the outputs from a forecast, then I would recommend doing more of a traditional AI solution around that. Hopefully that clarifies there. Okay, if you have questions about that, feel free to ask. Come off mute and ask. We can talk about it. Okay, do we have any suggestions for use cases, or should I show you data analysis? Okay, let's do some data analysis then. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. I am going to take a bunch of feedback. This is just general feedback from social media. So let's assume this is social media feedback. By the way, this is fake feedback. But this is feedback from a beverage product. And we're going to assume that it came all from like your comments on one day on Instagram, a couple days on Instagram, right? We're going to put it into ChatGPT. And you have two ways you could do this. You could copy and paste this to you would be using CoachGPT. I don't have access to it, so I'm going to use ChatGPT to demo this. And you would upload your file. And you would put in, I've got to find my downloads here. I have lost my downloads. Okay. Sorry about that. We will go with copy and pasting. Normally you upload it, but say, I do not have that. So we're going to paste it in here. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to give it a prompt and say, this is feedback from our social media team. This is customer feedback. So you want to tell it a little bit about the data it's going to get. Analyze the data. Typos don't really matter. And tell me the top 3, let's go 5 themes, sentiment, and recommendations for improvement. So here we go. I'm going to paste all that in there, and it will take it in. And that's a lot. And here we go. So we have product quality and taste is a top theme. We have positive and negative around that. Positive feedback highlights about the new flavors. And so it is extracted which ones flavors were positive, but it also gives some negative feedback about changes in flavor, etc. And you start to see these themes in all of that data. Now that was, I think it was 90 something lines of data, 94 lines of data. And so you can see here, all of a sudden we have insights, right, into what our customers are saying. And so you can imagine this. So 94 lines of feedback is a lot, but it's not impossible to kind of go through. You can imagine if you had 1,000 lines of feedback, 2,000. This is a great way to get instant insights on your data. And so you can imagine coming into a meeting and you analyze this in a meeting, and then your team can have a conversation around this data and say, hey, what do we think about these recommendations for improvement? Is this something we're already doing? Is it something that maybe we should consider doing? And so on. So, but that's just kind of the first version of this. We can go further and say, categorize the feedback into three sentiments: happy, frustrated, neutral. You can define the categories. Give 5 examples of each. So now I wanted to extract some of the data points to show us some of the commentary. So you could see, Jennifer, you have your hand raised over there.
Yes, I see some questions in the chat.
Perfect. Thank you.
Would you elaborate more on what format of the files input we should use as the material for generative AI to proceed further?
Yes. So CVS, Excel sheets work, PDFs work. You can upload PDFs and it can analyze PDFs. You can use copy and paste like I did there. Image recognition is going to depend on your system. So if you had like maybe a picture of, say, a bunch of forms, right, and you wanted to ask questions about that, that's less reliable depending on your system, but that's also another one. I would say Excel and CVS are probably some of the best, and PDF as well.
All right. One other question. Can we mass upload documents or data into ChatGPT?
So you would be using CodeGPT, and you will have file limits. I know someone last session in the other cohort hit the file limit, but I don't actually know what the limit is. And that might be a good question for your administrator. What is the file limit? That's a great question, though. Any other questions?
Okay, and one more. Maurice, or someone can. Okay, Marie said, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and during the intro, the creator provided a statement confirming the podcast was generated without the use of AI. Within the context of a podcast, I would not see the use of AI as negative, but if you had a crystal ball, do you think with the increasing use of AI, it could be seen as negative?
Yes, absolutely. I think there are already AI generated podcasts out there, much like there are AI generated YouTube videos out there. When you see a lot of and when we say AI generated, it can actually mean a couple of different things. It can mean AI generated in that the content was created. So I could I could just create a podcast outline based on this product data. I mean, that's ridiculous, but let's just see. Targeted to CMOs, so chief marketing officers. So now I've got an outline for a podcast. And then I could go further and say, write the script. Do we consider this AI generated if a human reads it? It's kind of an open question. Then you could go further from that, and there are platforms out there where you just tell it in a prompt like this that I just did, and it will not only generate the script, it'll generate the audio for it as well. So these tools already exist on the market. These aren't things that necessarily you have access to in like CodeGPT. I mean, you could create this with CodeGPT, but not the audio piece. And I do think there is already backlash definitely to this. And I think there will be a premium on human delivered content because it has depth. When you listen to a lot of generated content, you can start to hear the kind of sameness of it and the lack of kind of tonality and pace that you're used to when hearing a human talk. So, yeah. Great question, though.
Roger is asking, does ChatGPT have the capability to recognize voice, a recording? Can we speak to it within the last paid version?
I believe you can. Again, not CoachGPT. I'm almost positive you can, or at least they were rolling it out. That it could speak to you and you can speak to it. But there's another one that's called Pi that you can speak directly to. So there's all sorts of different tools out there. And like this one, this is one that I think you can talk to. We have too many. Yeah, I've got my own topic. And you'll see when you work at this, it'll read to you. So you can have it read to you, and then you should be able to talk to it. Just not entirely sure where. So I think talking to these systems, I know on the ChatGPT app, you can talk to it, but maybe not on the desktop. Any other questions I can answer on that? These are great questions because when we are talking about generative AI, we are exploring so many pieces of it. It's such a big topic. And really our ideas come from this kind of type of conversation. So I'll show you one last thing. Create a report for senior management, highlighting the top themes in the data, recommendations, and next steps. Be concise, no yapping. I always add no yapping because ChatGPT is very wordy.
What does yapping mean?
Yapping means it's like slang for talking a lot. Just yep, but we make this.
Just unnecessary words.
Yeah, unnecessary words. So this is already too long. So that didn't work. So here's a great example. ChatGPT has multiple models and they're going to give you different outputs. And ChatGPT's new model 4.0 is a lot wordier even when we do this. But this is where the human comes in and says, you know what? My boss is not going to read all that. I am going to cut that down myself. So it's already done work and saved you the time. So that is the demo of how we really move through tasks, right? When we're doing this, you can have a solve your business problem by analyzing the data, but you could always go further and say, I'm going to analyze it and then create a report every week for senior management based on our social media feedback, right? And you could do that easily with generative AI. So now that we have done that, oh, do we have another question?
Questions?
Yeah, great.
Can AI provide multiple languages?
Yes, absolutely. Now, there are some languages that are better. So the more popular languages like Spanish, Chinese, Mandarin Chinese, German, French, like some of those languages, much better. But the smaller the language is in terms of usage, and dialects get a lot harder. So yes, it can, but also, and companies are using LLMs for localization, but they are also not always, they make mistakes as well. And interestingly, they hallucinate incorrect translations, which is also kind of a level that is really interesting. So they will hallucinate a translation. So translate something into a language that wasn't even in the original documentation. So.
Okay, and you might know or not, what's the difference between CoachGPT and ChatGPT?
So that's a great question. And I think that's a question we can keep asking because all models will be different, right? And your model will be very similar to ChatGPT in the sense that you're using OpenAI GPT model, right? Claude from Anthropic is a different model. So it'll be very similar. What changes on the back end is you have different settings that whoever built the tool may decide, and you may not have access to those settings. So they may have a setting, there's like a setting that makes your outputs more creative or more or less creative, make them wordier, less wordier, and so on. And so sometimes those tools are available to people, other times they're not. So you may see differences in that. And then also your model has likely been trained on Coca-Cola data, right? So it may have some additional understanding of your brand, so to speak. So it's a great question to ask.
Awesome. And David asked, give me 1 second, can CoachGPT connect with our internal database like Core and Picasso to get data? And just for everyone's information, I asked Roland and he said this will be a future functionality in the works, connecting to Power BI databases, etc. And also PDF files are possible with KO Assist.
Beautiful. That's great. Thank you for that. And I keep asking these questions because I think the more we understand these systems, the more we can get concrete use cases. I will say connecting to internal data sources is one of the top feature requests across all companies right now because it's still pretty manual to kind of upload each file and stuff like that. And we'll see examples in future lessons where we look at like Copilot from Microsoft and stuff like that and being able to use your existing files with Word. So there's a lot to come in this space.
Do we have time for one more question?
Yeah, well, let's
They
go
just
for
keep
it. These
coming.
are great questions.
Can you talk more on hallucinations? Where is the fake information coming from? Does it already exist and therefore ChatGPT is picking up on existing information?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I say that after every question, probably because I love your questions. So the thing to remember about generative AI is that it doesn't actually understand. It's a prediction machine. It is predicting through very complex algorithms and math what the most likely they call it token, what the most likely token is, and token is just a portion of words, so it's a selection of letters, right, that will answer your question or complete your task. So that is a very different way from how we understand language and answering questions. It has no baseline understanding. It has been given a vast amount of data, an amount of data that it's almost hard to wrap your heads around, right? So it's been trained on Wikipedia, on Reddit, on books, all that type of information. So it's essentially memorized that information. And so when you are querying it, it is taking all that information, looking for patterns between it. So it's not just repeating what is in its data, but it's looking for patterns and associations with those words, and then giving you the most likely output. Now, in that output, it's likely going to be correct. Most of the time it is correct, but most of the time being correct is not the same as it always being correct. And the problem is that if you are not someone who's familiar with the subject matter that you're asking it about, you don't actually know when it's incorrect because it will tell you the answer as if it's correct. It has no way of knowing if it's incorrect or not correct. It's not the machine does not understand correctness versus incorrect, if that makes sense. So when it hallucinates, it's simply giving you what it thinks you want. And that makes it very tricky when you are relying on these outputs. So I like to talk about this is later on. You can reference this in this lecture because we're not going to go over it necessarily in this course today, but we talk about mitigating hallucinations. One thing to do is to make sure that when you are using an output, look at the risk. Are you going to use that output and report? Let's say you have an analysis and you're going to present to senior leadership, and senior leadership is going to base their strategy on your analysis. I would recommend double checking your outputs and making sure they're accurate. Now, let's say you're using, let's conversely think of a low risk situation. You're using the outputs to brainstorm in your team. So you have this kind of collective knowledge and experience on your team. You see these outputs and someone goes, you know what, based on my experience, that's not something we should do. Okay, so you're kind of fact checking that output there, but it's a low risk situation. If the answer is wrong, it's not going to really harm anybody. So that's why with these models, when we build them customer facing, we have to be very, very careful because they will not, they will make mistakes. There was a famous example real recently in the US, I think it was the US or Canada, where a chatbot, a generative AI chatbot, promised a customer that they would sell them a truck for $1. Obviously not true. That created a lot of brand risk, right? And maybe even some financial risk as well. So